Rear Admiral, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Lee, we live in interesting times. Based on your background, your military expertise, are you able to provide, look, as of today, an appraisal of what we're seeing in terms of the geopolitics, not the linear, but the geopolitics, the statesman, and what we should be looking in terms of leadership?
Well, without being dramatic, and it's easy not to be, to be over dramatic right now. Our holiday from history is over. The reality is that while we certainly saw Cold War, post-Cold War dividends in the early 90s, we saw probably demobilisation of I guess, militaries and industries. We're now seeing reindustrialisation. We're seeing mobilisation. We're seeing really what we didn't want to see, but the reality was always going to occur again, and that's geostrategic shifts and major power, such as the US, China, Russia, competition and confrontation. And you can see that now, not just in what's currently happening in the Middle East, of course focused on Iran, but also in the other significant global conflicts, such as the Ukraine-Russian conflicts and others that haven't just been breaking out, which have been warming up for some time now. Again, I'll give you another quote. ESG 1.0 is critical. We all care about the environment. We all care about our social responsibilities. We all care about governance. But it's about ESG 2.0 at the moment. That's energy, security, and geopolitics. And we need to actually face that reality.
So who's got the energy at the moment? I think Mr. Trump's playing it pretty smart in terms of control of the energy. Venezuela was one hell of an achievement. What, 45 minutes to an hour, and you change your government and change the ownership of a nation. And he's picked up a lot of the energy. We've got the Straits of Hormuz, which we've been reading about. I think everyone's been carried away too much on the price of the energy, short-term versus the longer-term gain of overriding a regime. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole play of energy?
Well, first of all, I agree with your point. We've had oil price shocks over the last 40, 50 years. And I think it gets back to our holiday from history is over. We sometimes forget what has actually occurred in the past and inevitably will occur again. I agree with the Venezuela, very interesting and important to realise what the objectives were for the US, not just with a regime in Venezuela, but in terms of control of that precious commodity. When you think about geostrategy and you talk about conflict, the critical consumables are basically fuel and munitions. And you need fuel. You need energy. You need energy for economies. And you need fuel, obviously, to make sure that you are strong as you need to be as a nation, including your militaries as well. So I think it's really focused on where that supply is coming from for countries like Australia, how much reserves we actually do have, where we're coming at,
What reserves do we have?
Well, obviously many will talk about 14 days. If that's a fact, then that's absolutely concerning. And the Straits of Hormuz.
That's sovereign risk. I mean, that's outrageous.
Absolutely.
We put ourselves in that years ago. We put ourselves in that position.
And sovereignty is an interesting word. It's not just about sovereignty. It's about control, making sure we are controlled. We are self-reliant in our alliance systems and our access to energy and to the right fuel. And be assured, I actually do think renewables have a future. I think nuclear energy has a future. It's all part of the mix. But right now we have to
tell that to the Brits at the moment.
You're correct. So we've got to make sure that it's all part of the mix, but we actually have to assure ourselves right now that we actually have the energy supplies that we need. Now, the Straits of Hormuz, having been through that strait many times on naval vessels, you realise how important it is, how vulnerable it is, and in terms of the tonnage of fuel that goes through there every single day, you realise that if it is choked, if it is, then it is going to have a significant
What effect. Is it, 20% of the world's supply or more?
That's what I understand. So, I mean, of course, US is, almost self-reliant, but certainly countries that we obviously have significant trading relationships with, such as Japan, China, etc., absolutely are reliant, as other partners do, on that oil and that fuel that's coming through the Straits of Hormuz.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, we're talking about military at the moment, because we are living in, like I said, interesting times. The tactics are incredible. We've been watching, haven't we? They've actually gone to take out the head of the snake, right? So in one attack, 40-odd people were taken out, okay? Then they're going in. Now, their whole approach is very different to what it's been historically, which is bomb the hell out of people, put them into submission. This is a totally different place, and there's two parts going on, or a couple of parts from what I can understand. Lance, tell me if I'm right or wrong. Firstly, the Americans seem to be going after, you talked weapons. So the Iranians still have the capability and the manufacturing capability on the ballistic missiles and on the drones. So they'll be looking at that. But the Israelis have gone in, taken the first part out, now are systematically looking at the leadership of the regime to take that out. Have we seen this sort of tactics historically?
Well,
you didn't take out Napoleon historically. You took out his armies. We didn't take out Napoleon. We didn't take out Hitler historically. We took out his armies. This is a very interesting play which we're seeing in history at the moment.
Well, the US has been declaratory on their objectives. Their first objective is to ensure that Iran does not have the capability through enriched uranium to design and build a nuclear weapon. I think that's the first objective. The second, of course, is to take out the current leadership of the Iranian system. The old guard, and of course, which they've effectively have. The third is to allow the conditions for potentially regime change. And there's two others. Of course, they've also talked about the annihilation of the Iranian Navy.
Yes, well, that's really at the bottom of the ocean, isn't it?
And ensuring, we've seen attacks today, of course, on, live, literally, of the US and Israeli system taking out Iranian mine layers, which was essentially designed to block the Straits of Hormuz. And the fifth one, of course, is to ensure the Straits of Hormuz remains open. So that's the 5 declared objectives, which they are working that through. You talked about, of course, it's the US and Israel, and while they are very aligned at the moment, they would actually also have different objectives as well here as well. So while they are very focused, and of course, US has a vote, Iran has a vote, and Israel has a vote, and of course the key stakeholders around, such as the Gulf states, will have a vote in this conflict as well. Plus, of course, the many nations around the world. But we need to understand that the US and Israel, their alliance, are the ones who are currently in conflict with Iran. Well,
hasn't the world been in conflict of Iran in some form or another? I think we just kicked their consulate general out, did we not that long ago?
Well, news would be reporting that Australia is now formally part of the conflict because of our offer and our commitment to provide aircraft, whether it be tankers or
it's not the Iranian people; it's a regime which sponsors terrorism. Ultimately, right? Is what that's what we're against.
Correct. That's absolutely so. In terms of, but under international law, and even the language of the US, they are at war with Iran. And we've even seen that being expanded, of course, in terms of a US submarine openly sinking an Iranian ship in international waters in the Leeuwin Ocean, not far from Sri Lanka. So you've seen a widening of a declaration of conflict, essentially a state of war that exists between the US and Iran.
Okay, leaders, right? Keir Starmer. You're an ex-Navy man.
Yeah.
They're sitting there talking about a ship which is still sitting there, 17, 18 days later.
Yeah, well,
and they were forewarned to move on that.
Well, I think UK's broader military readiness has been found wanting, and
very polite.
Found wanting is probably a very polite word to say, and of course that's probably the lack of investment of not just this UK government, but I suggest previous governments as well in terms of investing, sustainment, modernisation, obsolescence management, etc. as well. Even the national will, to ensure that the UK military is ready and prepared. I'm not being diplomatic here. I've worked very closely with the US military and the US national security systems throughout my career. And I've got a great respect for it. They, are incredibly professional. But to see the lack of investment in the UK military and national security system by a series of governments has been really disappointing. And of course, the moment that you actually need it, the UK, for example, the Royal Navy has found that many of its destroyers and frigates and all the things that it now needs to deploy, or submarines, are either in maintenance or just are simply not ready to do the job, which is of grave concern.
First role of a government, protect your people.
Absolutely. So that answers the question about the current UK government. But I'd say it's not just the current, it's also been previous in terms of preparing this great nation, the UK, and its military heritage and pedigree to be ready for when it's actually needed. And said it's been found wanting.
Okay, why don't we widen really up, Lee? Come on. General Council, United Nations.
Yeah.
Calling for talk. More talk about what?
Yeah, look, the United Nations, of course, was founded in very different circumstances.
And has failed completely for years.
Yeah, look, it's probably now not fit for purpose. If you were
Okay.
going to reinvent the United Nations,
Yep.
you'd still need a United Nations mechanism. You know, it could be, of course, you've got the Trump's border piece,
Yep.
and you've got other
Which is
versions,
interesting. It's
which
spin away.
is interesting.
Yeah.
Probably a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
You do need a United Nations of sorts. You
Yep.
need a way that international nations can come together on a wide range of issues, not least discussing conflict, peacemaking, peacekeeping, etc. as well. But the current construct of the United Nations has failed, continues to fail at the moment, and it probably needs to be either reinvigorated or we need to start again to make sure that it is effective. So a direct criticism of the United Nations, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The intentions are correct, but it's not working as. I mean, the United Nations.
Well, what are the intentions of the United Nations?
Well, first of all, the United Nations obviously.
Let's chat a little bit more.
Yeah.
While people are getting slaughtered.
United Nations are not part of the current conflict in any way, shape, or form. And they should be at some stage. When you're have an international conflict, you should have international consensus, and the United Nations potentially can be part of establishing that international or the legality of
Yep.
conflict, etc. as well. At the moment,
Then we've got the rights of veto of China and Russia and everything else, right? Who would obviously have their own agendas.
And again,
and the US, of course, too.
The Security Council and its construct with the 5 primary nations plus the additional nations is a construct which was born in the late 1940s, and it's probably now not fit for purpose.
Interesting. Where's China in all this then?
Well, China, of course, is a major power. It's a superpower, and of course we have a significant event coming up in the next few weeks when Trump, if it continues,
looks like he's going to,
will be hosted by President Xi in China from the 31st of March.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation for the first chat.
Absolutely. Post, the events of not just the last 2 weeks, but of course the last 12 months, the last 5-10 years will culminate in those discussions. And clearly President Trump is known for deals. President Xi is, ready to receive. And obviously, you're going to have two of the most, if not the most significant world leaders talking about a wide range of issues, and of course, in the shadow of what's actually happening in the Middle East at the moment. I know that President Trump has declared that this is not an endless war, and his intent in the next 1 or 2 weeks is to wrap it up. But can you realistically?
Pretty good wish list. Yeah.
Absolutely, between now and the 31st of March, I suggest that's not going to be realistic because Iran does have a vote and they will strike back.
Yep.
They will strike back asymmetrically.
Yep.
It could be terrorist attacks. It could be other ways. This is, I'm not suggesting it's an endless war yet, but of course the meeting between President Trump and President Xi will be in the shadow of significant global conflicts. So where does China? Well, China is watching, is observing.
Also, it's also going to be paying a pretty high fuel bill too, aren't they not?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the Straits of Hormuz will directly affect Chinese economic prosperity, etc. as well. So they will have significant interest and discussions on.
Well, they've got two parts: Venezuela,
yes,
where they're now going back to import a lot more oil from,
correct,
and they're going to be paying, as we said, the fluctuation of price of oil, Straits of Hormuz. Flip side is Mr. Trump, if he gets there fast enough and supports all that, could allow to be relaxed for China if they get the oil flowing again through Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah, it will be critically important for Australia to actually understand what the potential outcomes are of that meeting between President Trump and President Xi, because deals will be done. There's no doubt, in terms of two powerful nations, one particularly powerful nation that we're allied with, the US, in terms of our security relationships, our investor relationships, and our cultural and democratic relationships, and one, of course, which is by far our biggest trading partner, and we'll need to actually understand. And of course, Australia, while we are observing Iran, while we have committed to do certain things to support certainly the Gulf nations around Iran, we actually are still primarily focused on vertical Asia. That is up through Indonesia, through the Philippines, Taiwan, China, Japan, etc.
Are we fulfilling our duty to the US as an ally? We didn't even turn up last time we were asked to send a boat over.
Yeah. I would suggest historically...
historically, of recent times.
Yeah, so historically we've always done our part in terms of the alliance. in terms of, and I think you're referring to when the US asked us to have a ship in the Middle East. I think
We couldn't get one out of port. We're as bad as, was it Ship Dragon sitting in
yeah,
Portsmouth at the
I
moment?
think that was probably somewhat overstated. I mean, we actually did have ships in, I guess, our immediate regional area of interest, such as Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia. I'd say if I was a strategist and I'm no longer making those decisions,
Yep.
I would rather offer to replace US ships in Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, our area of interest,
Yep.
and to allow US ships then to go to other parts of the world. And I think, I'm not suggesting that's the exact conversation, but for us to keep sending ships to the Middle East, which is actually a long way from Australia,
Away from home. Yep.
consumes a lot of ships and a lot of resources versus our focus. And so the Indo-Pac is far more than, say, when I say vertical Asia, but when you think, of course, we've got the Pacific, we've got the Indian Ocean, but up through the Indonesian archipelago, into Southeast Asia, South China Sea, Northeast Asia. I mean, while all this was happening in Iran, of course, and all those events which are continuing to happen in Ukraine, of course, Australia had an incident.
Picked up by what? A Virgin pilot?
Well, we'll go back to that incident, but we had an incident with HMAS Toowoomba interacting with the PLA, the Chinese Navy,
Yes.
in the vicinity of course, our areas of operation as we are part of the international coalition who are enforcing, the North Korean regime to make sure they act in accordance with the UN resolutions.
And did we stand up on behalf of the Navy from the government?
Oh, well, look, I think, first at a tactical level, I've got no doubt the Australian Navy and that captain and that warship, absolutely conducted themselves professionally.
Sure they did.
And I'm absolutely assured that the Australian system made it known to the Chinese PLA system that we were not happy and what they did was dangerous and that we all need to conform to international norms.
And they obviously listened because then we didn't even pick up what they were doing a couple of months later.
Well, you're referring to, I guess, the PLA Navy incident when they actually circumnavigated Australia, I assume. So, yeah, look.
Honestly, what was happening there?
Well, I guess what was publicly known versus what, from an intelligence perspective, clearly two PLA Navy or People's Liberation Army Navy or Chinese Navy warships with a support ship.
Any subs involved as well, you think?
Well, we don't know. I mean, potentially, absolutely. I mean, no one would
wouldn't they
declare that. So it's like we wouldn't declare whether
Does
submarines
it come
are
out in the
involved.
intelligence reports?
Yeah, well, I think I think people have been asked directly and we can't confirm or otherwise.
Okay.
I mean, submarines.
What would you think if you're as a naval officer? What would you be doing? You had the opportunity to come up close to Australia?
Well, I would tell you that if I was deploying with a task group, say into the Indian Ocean or into the East Asia, I'd feel far more comfortable knowing that I had either an Australian or an allied submarine working closely by me. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
So whether the Chinese Navy or PLA Navy actually had a submarine or not, I can't confirm. But what it does reiterate is that a nation like China has the capability to deploy a long way from its own nation, and Australia should be alert. Should we be alarmed? Possibly as well. We've got to make sure that we have the right defence systems in place, we have the right Navy in place, and we actually allocate the right resources and the right money to make sure we have those in place as well.
All right. Are we?
I'd say no, but I think that's a realisation across, not just this government, but previous governments, that we potentially need to spend a lot more money on defence. The reality is that, there's this magical figure of 2%, and, I think the current government's, committed to, going up to 2.4%, but I think it's universal that we need to go to 3% of GDP, which, potentially is up to an additional $70 billion that a government or the Australian system.
How much is it?
Up to $70 billion additional per year.
Per year.
Per year. And,
Okay.
you hear today of less tax receipts, say, from, big mining giants.
Yep.
The NDIS
We also
pressures.
hear the spending going left, right and centre till I drunk and sailors. So, yeah.
And Australians now have to make choices. In the future, do we want a stronger, more effective defence force, or do we want free dental? We've actually got to make these decisions, and we've got to educate people. Ideally, you want both. We only have finite resources, finite money. We've got to make those calls. So the reality is now, because we're in this period of industrialisation, this period of mobilisation, these huge geostrategic shifts, and Australia no longer is a bystander. We used to have the tyranny of distance. Now we actually have the reality of proximity.
Yep.
We actually have to make sure our defence force and all our national security apparatus, and also all our diplomatic apparatus, and all those things that will contribute to deterring an adversary, nuclear submarines, aircraft, land-based missiles, but also all those other components, cyber forces, intelligence forces, making sure that we are on the leading edge of technologies such as hypersonics, quantums, AI, robotics, etc. as well. This is something Australia can't act like a small country. We've actually got to act like the middle power that we actually are. We've got to stop punching above our weight, because that's a cop-out. We've got to start punching into our weight, and that means we have to potentially pay more for the things that we need right now and offset against other things which are important, but unfortunately they will have to be diluted somewhat to allow us to pay the bill.
So who's in charge of all this? Because, I spoke to Jim Molan a while back, and his frustration was left hand wasn't, right hand was talking about that we have never got it together as one form of defence, whether it's naval, air force, or army. What are we working on? And then there's intelligence, as you said. Come on, who's really, we got, the Israelis have got 6 million people, and they've just shown us what intelligence does. Best in the world. We've seen 200 airplanes fly out. The Americans have got more airplanes on one aircraft carrier than we've got in the whole of the Air Force. So, in all honesty, Lee, we're a long, long way behind. Our stuff is junket material in some parts. So, who's in charge of calling the shots on this? And are we actually going to spend the money appropriately? Because I'm hearing whispers from other people that you will know that we're buying frigates, which are the most expensive in the world, which, okay, maybe naval man, you might say that's really good, but are they? Is these submarines really worth the money that we're going to be spending? Thanks for watching the No Limitations podcast, brought to you by Blenheim Partners, board and executive search firm. As a trusted advisor, we work with Australian listed groups, multinational corporations, large private companies, and social impact organisations on their most critical people choices to drive change, prepare for growth, and outperform their peers. To learn more about Blenheim Partners and executive search, visit our website, blenheimpartners.com. And now, back to the show.
Well, I'll come back to AUKUS Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 and perhaps maritime capability, because it is expensive.
Well, we are an island at the end of the day.
Yeah. In terms of actually the decisions, Australia this year, in the next coming months, will, through this government and through on advice, will promulgate a national defence strategy, which will talk about the threats to Australia and how we intend, either as a sovereign individual nation or within our collective alliances. Of course, our most important one, of course, is the ANZUS alliance with the US, but with a whole lot of other alliances, will assure that Australia is prepared as it can be to ensure it deters an adversary. And of course, balanced against that will be called what's an IIP, or an integrated investment plan, make sure we've got the money to pay for those things.
Sure.
Now, Major General Molan, absolutely, everyone should be critical and everyone will have a view on it, etc. as well, but it is a combined effort, not just from defence, but also other government agencies such as Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the intelligence agencies, and Australia has 10 core agencies that all come under the umbrella Office of National Intelligence.
Yep.
The central agencies such as Prime Minister and Cabinet, those who pay, Treasury, Finance, etc. as well. So it's actually a combination to make sure that some of the smartest people in the country come together. Now, that's politics aside, that's the advice. But ultimately, it's the government of the day or the ministers of the day.
Well, there's been a lot of smart people in the UK come together and nothing been done for years.
Well, ultimately, it's the government of the day that actually will have a range of options. And of course, they are the government and they have a right. They'll then make the decision. And of course, out of that, we'll see where we land in maybe, I guess, in June, post the budget, post the promulgation of this strategy, post the prioritisation within this integrated investment plan, to see how much more money will be allocated to the national defence system, national security system. Of course, it's not just defence hardware or the Department of Defence or the Australian Defence Force. It's our cyber security agencies, our intelligence agencies, it's our border force agencies, our home affairs, our police agencies, etc., to make sure they're all joined up and all, and make sure that inter-agency effect is very powerful. Now I'm making it sound like it's all perfect. It's far from perfect.
How bad is it?
Well, I don't think it's bad. I
Oh,
think
that's
actually,
is it really that good?
I don't think it's necessarily good either. I think it's actually.
So where is it at?
It's challenging. It's challenging and tricky, to get yourself in the best position. I said you provide advice, and often you are limited by, you might be
Politicians?
Politics,
Yeah.
legislation,
Vote of the day.
finances, and
yeah.
money. And
Yep.
money is a big factor as
Yeah.
well. So we shall see.
So what do we need?
Well, I certainly.
If you're going to come in and say, I'm the Prime Minister, you presented to Prime
yeah.
Ministers before, you've done that, you've been in charge of you've seen the borders, you know that like the back of your hand. What do we need?
Well, first of all, we need very good intelligence. And
We got it?
And Australia is actually part of probably, I think, the most important alliance, which is called the Five Eyes. It's the intelligence sharing arrangements with United States, United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And for Australia, to be frank, if you're a businessman, it's a very good deal. We contribute to that through our intelligence capabilities, through supporting our alliance partners. In return, we get the very best intelligence possible in terms of, I guess.
It just looks a bit funny when Chinese ships turn up. We didn't see that for our intelligence.
Yeah, look, and I would probably.
Did we know they were coming or not?
Well, I suggest we did.
Yeah, so we're just monitoring, were we?
I'd suggest we were monitoring the whole time, and I would suggest the information that's on the public record versus the reality are quite different.
Okay,
Remember, those ships from China didn't just appear off our coast.
I hope not.
They obviously would, they probably were being tracked through Northeast Asia, through Southeast Asia, going through the Indonesian.
They weren't encouraged to turn around?
Well, I don't think that would be in international waters. I would think we have expectations of how any nation or any navy conducts themselves.
We've been encouraged to turn around.
But but if you're in international waters, even if your right to actually transit through, say, an exclusive economic zone of another country, you actually, as long as you're complying with international expectations, international laws, international norms, etc., as well. And even high seas firings. I've conducted high seas firings in many places around the world. We obviously communicate. There's safety requirements. You inform, and in fact, that case, I think it's very public. A Virgin pilot picked up, the warnings that the firing was going to occur, and then a firing occurred. And that's whether that Chinese ship was doing the wrong thing by firing near known international air lanes or air routes. I don't have all those details in front of me, but I think, But I think what it does say to the Australian people, though, is you've just had two very powerful Chinese warships, which have missiles, torpedoes, and all those things. You're perhaps seeing what the US is doing in Iran, not far from Sydney.
Correct.
So now, their declarations of what they were doing versus the reality, we don't know, but we better make sure we are prepared. Whether it be a PLA Navy or any other Navy that's operating in close proximity to Australia, we want to make sure that our intelligence systems, our non-military defence systems, and our military, in this case, Navy systems, are the best they can be to deal with that now and going forward.
All right, so you covered me off on the intelligence. You said there's 5 things. What's the other?
In terms of where
we're up to, what are the things you're going to walk in and request from me as Prime Minister?
Well,
on my budget, you're going to give me a 2.5%.
Hold our nerve on AUKUS. AUKUS Pillar 1 is, there's different pillars, from us building facilities that can actually host United States, United Kingdom, and then Australian nuclear submarines, making sure that we have a nuclear culture in Australia that can actually safely and professionally operate nuclear-propelled submarines, even though they conventionally aren't. And I make that very clear. We don't. Australia has no intention of getting nuclear weapons. They're conventional weapons, such as torpedoes, such as that torpedo that was fired against the Iranian ship off Sri Lanka just recently. So making sure that we have that. The second pillar is to make sure that we have everything in place, for having actually rotational forces or rotational basing of US submarines, which could include their families and all the things that they need in terms of sustaining and maintenance and munitions and all this logistics support, and for the UK, and making sure Australia has prepared and ready to start owning submarines. At the moment, of course, we're manning, submarines by having, declared.
Even yesterday we had a couple of guys in the sub, didn't we?
We had three, of course.
Just walking around not doing much, according to the PM.
Well, yeah, they,
unusual.
The Prime Minister, was very clear that we actually on submarines which are operating in this region, the US, there's highlights.
Sure we are.
There's Australians going to be on it. We've been very clear on that. The third stage, of course, is actually for us to then buy US Virginia-class submarines from the US and actually to base them.
So we're buying the right subs at the moment?
I think so.
You think so?
Virginia-class, I can't tell you whether that submarine that just took out the Iranian submarine was a Virginia-class or not, but that's the kind of capability, that stealth capability, the ability to have, say, 2 or 3 Australian nuclear submarines operating, say, in Australia's threat vectors, so maybe in Northern Australia. I can tell you if a adversary or a task group was coming to Australia and they knew that there was nuclear submarines potentially in the area, 2 or 3 of them patrolling around, that will change their calculations significantly. They are the apex kind of predators. They are the most powerful military systems.
So they can't be, in 15 years' time when they finally turn up, they can't be tracked?
Well, first of all,
I don't know. I'm just
AUKUS, in terms of, we already have US submarines turning up, already visiting and being maintained and operating out of Western Australia. Shortly, you'll have US, and of course, we currently just had very publicly a UK nuclear submarine, the HMS Anson, do the same thing. In the next couple of years, we'll have US submarines actually rotating through in terms of I guess, temporary basing and doing all the things that they need to do. And 2032, which is only 6 years away, is when Australia is earmarked to get its first Virginia-class submarine. That's not, 15, 20 years. Certainly the final, I guess, pillar is for Australia to buy what's called SSN AUKUS, which is essentially it's a UK submarine with Australian and US input, which is actually that with the UK we'll be buying and we will be building here in Australia. That's the one that's...
Hold on, just on that. How much are we actually building here in Australia? I've heard that been thrown around. Come on. Who's building it?
Well,
the primes or Australian companies?
Well, the very clear direction from this
the primes?
From the primes, the government is actually for us to build the majority of that submarine and fitting out here, that final one, the SSN AUKUS here in Australia. But I'll give you another example. I'm on the board.
Actually believe that, do you?
I do, because I'm on the board.
So the Australians are actually going to build this up?
I absolutely.
Well, they're going to be sitting there wearing the BAE or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, well, look, I mean...
Or the one out of the US.
It may be an international foreign prime, but of course it's going to be an Australian subsidiary of that prime. But I think probably a better example, I'm on the board of Austal. And Austal, of course, is based in West Australia. We already build patrol boats and other vessels for Australia and the Pacific Islander countries.
In the US?
And of course, we're now building landing craft for the Army. We're actually, if we perform well, we'll partner with Japan to build the future frigates. But in the US, at Mobile, Alabama, you look at the hotel and all you can see is Austal. Austal is building Coast Guard ships, frigate components, modules. It's also building significant...
Because the Australian Navy wouldn't purchase it years ago.
Well, they're building significant modules for the USS Virginia-class nuclear submarines, what's called the SSNs, which are the attack submarines. It's also building modules for the USS Columbia-class, which is actually the SSBN, or the ballistic missile submarines as well. So while the Australian government may be giving money to the US right now to assist them building up their industrial base, so they do have the capacity to build our Virginia-class submarines, some of it's already coming back to Australia. Austal is an Australian-listed company because we actually have contracts to build modules for US Virginia-class submarines in Mobile, Alabama. Now, if we had that technology there, clearly that technology can be transferred as well. Noting that we actually have significant shipbuilding facilities in South Australia at Osborne and significant facilities in Henderson in Western Australia, just south of Perth, just south of Fremantle, which will be significantly being increased over the next I guess, 10, 15 years. Remember in Perth, Fremantle, Henderson, you actually have three significant industries side by side. You now have the nuclear submarine industry,
Yep.
you have the warship and industry, and you also have that significant offshore infrastructure industry as well. So you actually have this huge pool of adjacent industries which will be supporting each other. And I can assure you from my US colleagues,
Yep.
West Australia is critical. It's really important in terms of not only an operational location,
Yep.
but also the high confidence in its ability to have the right skill sets to certainly to sustain, maintain, obsolescence manage nuclear submarines and other ships in the future.
Okay, that's 6, 7 years, 10 years away. All right. Where are we today in state of Navy in Australia?
Well, the government commissioned a review.
No, we don't need that. Come on,
I'll use
Don't
it.
do all the fanfare. Come on. Where are we at?
Commissioned a review into, I guess, the size of our Navy probably about 2 years ago. And
Yep.
out of that, it's called enhanced lethality of our surface force.
Yep.
They then committed to actually almost doubling the size of our Navy in terms of frigates, destroyers,
Yeah.
submarines, etc., over a relatively short period, over
Yep.
about a 15, 20-year period.
Doubled it from a small number to start with,
Absolutely.
or what?
It
So
was
what
a
are we
small
talking
number.
about, Lee?
Oh, well, you're talking about, potentially from being, say, a major combatants going from, say, 11 to 12 to, say, 20. So it's quite significant, in terms of, destroyers, frigates, obviously a commitment to 8 nuclear submarines, commitments to a very large landing craft, for both the Army and for our amphibious operations. So you're going to see, not over maybe 7 years, but you're going to see us be on a trajectory where our Navy, Army, maritime capability will double. So that's encouraging. Now, whether that occurs at the pace or at the need, or whether it's too late, whether we are ready after the grand finals happened, then that, of course, is
What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I think when you talk about mobilisation, when's the best time to mobilise? 10 years ago. Next best time is today.
Yep.
So if you missed the boat 10 years ago, you need to start doing it now. We are concerned by 2027 to make sure that, especially in terms of geostrategic competition and potentially, if brinkmanship goes wrong or something, a conflict such as Taiwan, that happens, I'm not suggesting it will, but if something like that did happen, in a much shorter time frame, so between now and 2030, we may find ourselves short of the capabilities that we actually need. Hence, we are now putting more money, more effort in terms of actually to ensure that, we do have the Navy, Army, Air Force and all that national security.
So if I was going to strike Australia, great time now, eh? We've got no nuclear subs. We've got half the size of Navy that we should have. We're pretty depleted. And our relationships with the US have been, what do you think?
Well,
Great or not?
Well, I think it referred back to your question before about the UK, about being caught. And they have acknowledged that, and and significant US UK
Well, the Yanks
leaders
acknowledge it nicely as well.
absolutely have acknowledged that unfortunately their preparedness has been found wanting. They're trying to catch up very quickly now. Now, I guess what I'm saying, to be clear, is Australia has to assure itself that it's in the best position to respond to all those known and unknown challenges we're going to face. So our history, has suggested that that conflicts, you don't just have a peace dividend after a Cold War finishes. You have to be prepared for the next a period of competition between nations. Said our holiday from history is over. Australia's got to get over itself. We've actually got to talk about things like mobilisation, industrialisation, and national will. Are we hard enough to actually face the reality of what is occurring in the Middle East right now, what's happening in Ukraine, and what potentially could happen in our near region? We've got to make sure that we are.
Well, what's going on in the near region? If we talk about the Pacific Islands, and China's buddied up with a lot of them, building ports, building a lot of infrastructure, getting them over the line. Very smart, actually, tactically. Yeah. How close are they?
Well, I think there is a lot of foreign influence and foreign interference occurring in the Pacific, and some of it is not in Australia's interests, and we need to acknowledge that and confront it, and potentially take
Can't
action.
confront it on our own.
Well, of course, we have very strong partners, in the Pacific. I mean, the Pacific Islands themselves, of course, I think Australia has to assure itself that we're doing everything to make sure we're the best partner with those countries. And
Do you think we've done well on that?
I think we have not done as well as we could have, and we would acknowledge that over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Too late, ship's gone.
Well, in some cases, it may be late. I think other cases, for example, our recent announcements with Papua New Guinea, our recent activities with a number of what's called the Pacific Maritime Program. It's supplying Guardian-class patrol boats to most of the Pacific Island countries who's requested them, providing air surveillance, supporting countries in terms of intelligence so they can deal with, say, narcotics or theft of tuna or potentially foreign influence and foreign interference from other countries in the region. I think they're the things that Australia has contributed to and is very focused on. Not perfect. We could always do more.
How many subs do the Chinese have?
Look, I can't tell you exactly, but if the US is talking about assuring themselves that they have 60 plus attack submarines, I'd say China probably has a similar number to that at the moment. So we make sure that we actually are always, as an alliance system, that we have more than China.
Okay, so let's say the Chinese are roughly 60.
Yep.
Are they as good as or not as good as?
They're not as good as. No.
Okay, far behind in terms of technology?
They're closer than they were, but they're still behind in terms of technology. But that said, I'm not being complacent here. I mean, they are,
they're moving pretty quick, aren't they?
Absolutely. So, I mean, countries like China, but other countries in terms of, say those AUKUS Pillar 2 technologies, such as hypersonics, quantum, AI, autonomous systems, undersea warfare systems, cyber systems, etc. as well. Countries like China and others are doing impressive things in terms of assuring themselves that they're advancing those technologies. And we need to be aware of that. We need to ensure that we have, I guess, almost an offset strategy in obviously within AUKUS to assure ourselves that we are always on the cutting edge or advance of any potential adversary. Remember, we talked about AUKUS Pillar 1. AUKUS Pillar 2 is...
And when does that really kick in?
Well, it's kicked in. I mean, in terms of actually we now, between Australia, of course, and US and UK, we have this significant technology transfer, the most advanced technologies, across those different capabilities. And Australia, of course, we lead in some of those areas. We have very advanced programs in terms of hypersonics or in terms of quantum programs or some of our autonomous and other robotic systems are actually world-class. And now we're working, say, in particular within AUKUS, with our US and UK partners to assure ourselves between the three countries that we actually are the most advanced we can be. What's most important is Australia will receive those technologies at the same time as the US and UK. We won't be a 20-year lag. So, to be frank, the most advanced submarine technologies, the most advanced missile technologies, the most advanced torpedo technologies, the most advanced drone technologies. An important outcome of AUKUS Pillar 2 is that Australia has access to and is receiving those for our end users, our military or our other national security operatives at the same time as our partners. And that is a significant advancement of where we were, say, 5-10 years ago.
How good is our intelligence?
Very good. And I'll say that. And partly because of our coalition or partnership through the Five Eyes arrangement and then our wider intelligence networks. And just, I think, the professionalism of our core intelligence agencies, whether it be OSIS or ASIO, Defence Intelligence Organisation, our overarching, I guess, lead, which is the Office of National Intelligence, used to be called the Office of National Assessments, Australian Federal Police Intelligence, Australian Border Force Intelligence. I think probably the most impressive thing is not just the intelligence and the calibre of the intelligence, but how we actually share it between those agencies. It's probably an exemplar. And I, as you know, commanded an operation called Operation Sovereign Borders.
I'll ask you about that in a second.
And much of what Operation Sovereign Borders, apart from deterring a threat to Australia, in that case, irregular and illegal migration by sea, the most impressive thing when I was commanding that operation
Intelligence?
So the intelligence and the intra and interagency sharing of important information to ensure no stovepipes, no competition. And to be frank, there are some countries, you've seen what happens in the US, for example. They're very good intelligence, but in terms of their sharing it between different government agencies, departments, Australia is not perfect, but we are very good and we're an exemplar, and many other nations comment on that as well.
Is government acting on the intelligence it's getting?
Yes, absolutely. I think, no, are they acting on it?
Come on, Lee, are they really acting on the intelligence they're getting?
Let's redefine that. So are they, have they mechanisms in place to make sure they receive that intelligence?
I'm sure they're receiving it. I'm sure they've read it. Are they acting on it?
Well, they have to.
If you're in the room, are they acting on it, Lee?
So they act on what they need to act on,
and
they prioritise, and they often have to. Sometimes they have to risk manage because you can't respond to every bit of intelligence and give it all the same prioritisation and all the resources. In terms of accepting the intelligence rather than acting, and then understanding it, and then ensuring it's prioritised accordingly, and then allocating resources to it, I think we do a good job. You know, again, not perfect, but I think we do a much better job than perhaps is portrayed. Not perfect. There is a lot of, obviously, independent committees that assure ourselves about the intelligence we're receiving and how we act on it, including political ones, but also other ones as well. And I think overall, our acceptance of the intelligence, that is, we're not ignoring anything. We're not parking anything. But we actually have to act on accordance with a whole lot of things. Our international law, our red lines, and also then we actually only have limited assets to make sure how we act on that as well.
What is our border security like? She's a big country.
It's a huge country.
Biggest island in the world.
We have one advantage that we are an island, which allows us to, for example,
but the biggest challenge in half the world at the moment is border control.
It is, in fact, actually, someone asked the other day, do we have any land borders? Officially Australia, if it does have land borders, it's very close to Papua New Guinea. It's Saibai Island. It's only 2 or 3 kilometres away. It's very, very close. Of course, that was closed during COVID. And of course, in Antarctica, our claims in Antarctica, we have land borders with Norway and France. But apart from that, we're a maritime nation. We have a lot of offshore territories in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, in Northern Australia, and of course in the Southern Ocean. So that means we have one advantage. We actually, because we're maritime, we actually
but we've traded on that for a long time because we're maritime. We're blah, blah, blah. Got to come all the way down here and get us.
But it does mean we can reduce.
What do we like? If I want to get in, can I get in?
Well, you can reduce our threats to basically have to come through either airports or through ports or through through maritime, through littoral areas versus the land challenge that other countries around the world have. We don't have that. So that's one thing. So that means that if we understand. Have good intelligence in terms of and good surveillance of our maritime zones.
Do we?
Well, if I come at the second part, and if we actually in particular have good intelligence of where those threats originate at their source, could be such as it could be people smuggling, it could be narcotics,
or Indonesia, or whatever
etc.
the case is.
As well.
We'll get them at the source.
One, we can do it at source.
Yep.
And if we have good surveillance, then we actually can detect it. And if we have good assets, then because an adversary to Australia, whether it be a state actor, non-state actor, criminal, accident criminal, if they think they're being watched, whether they are or not, they'll behave differently. So really, we have to have assets in place. We have to have good intelligence systems, good aircraft, good satellite coverage, good patrol boats, ships, unmanned systems, whatever we need. Good border protection at our airports, good border protection at our ports. Making sure our littoral areas up North Australia, which are huge, are being watched. So our adversaries think they're being watched. And that really is the effect. Now, Australia, relative to other nations, well, look, sure, some things do get through. And we have, of course, we've been very focused, say in the last 15 years on irregular and illegal entry by sea. Of course, we've been focused on narcotics. We've been focused on other, weapons, etc. as well. But relative, to other countries around the world, I would argue that we do well. We're not perfect, and we could always do better.
So what's well? 6 out of 10? 7 out of 10
Oh, it's I give
compared to the other,
ourselves.
compared to the top,
Yeah.
not at the bottom of the world, to the top
Yeah,
ones.
well, I
Where
think
are
in
we?
turn compared to many nations around, I'd say we're about a 7 to 8 out of 10 in terms of our border systems. I think they are strong. And again, our intra-agency systems. You know, the border force talks to the federal police, it talks to state police, they talk to the defence
Yep.
force, they talk to the intelligence agencies,
Yep.
and we share information and we move things around very quickly. And we do have limited assets because we're only a population of 26 million on this huge continent.
Yep.
You know, and we have, you know, maybe limited in terms of, you know, our injection of funding and cash, you know, into to the things that we need to do.
Yep.
But I think, you know, and Operation Sovereign Borders, and of course I have to be careful what I talk about. It has been a successful operation. It has deterred.
Is it still in play?
Absolutely, it's still in play. You know,
Yep.
and that's, you know, it was started in 2013 when there's a very powerful Maritime Powers Act, which allows, you know, interagency cooperation. You know, there's some very strong measures, you know, on water operations to deter illegal migration. There was some strong activities in I guess at the sources, you know, working with other countries.
Yep.
But absolutely, and it's gone across governments. I think this government has been very declaratory about ongoing focus and prioritisation on Operation Sovereign Borders. So absolutely. So now I think it's been one of our most successful policy, I guess, decisions and then execution. Now, I acknowledge for some people Operation Sovereign Borders is sinister because it involves often stopping, I guess, refugees or people who actually are generally trying to get to Australia because they are desperate people. I get that.
Yeah.
I just want to, just for those who may, just to soften it a bit for really, the sailors, soldiers, border force policemen out at sea, when they stop people, their first objective is actually to save lives and look after those people and care them. In fact, I would often tell when I was actually doing the job myself, absolutely, I'd say, remember, these are humans, and to us, and I'd be on, say, a Navy ship before I was, I guess, commanding the operation, and I've done it many times from 2001. I tell our people they are irregular. You know, we'll go through the process now about their legality and potentially where they may or may not end in terms of having either a safe place, are they an economic refugee or a genuine political refugee? But our first responsibility is human, is to look after them, to save their lives at sea, treat them well, feed them, care for them, and then, you know, declare them as irregular, and then somebody else may declare them as illegal, you know, through our system, and we've got to respect that as well because we actually do have to protect our borders.
Yep.
But I just want to acknowledge all those sailors, soldiers, airmen, border force, policemen, and other government agencies who actually did that job and really did it. And, you know, and Australians should be really, really proud of them because they did it humanely, even though they were protecting Australia's national interest. Because, of course, in those groups that came to Australia, most actually probably were generally just good people just trying to escape a bad situation.
Yep.
That said, there were a few very bad people in there, and we had to do our job to make sure Australia was in control of our borders and in control of who came to Australia as well.
Bearing in mind what's happening in the Middle East and what the Iranians have sponsored, or the regime has sponsored in terms of terrorism, and bearing in mind your military background, what's the biggest concern we've got to be mindful of here in Australia? All the civilians out there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to comment, we have not heard the last of Iran. They're 92 million people.
Couldn't agree more.
We've probably got a lot of people who are very glad to see an evil regime and leadership gone.
Not yet.
But if you think, not yet, if you think maybe 10% of that population is still loyal to the current regime in 2 or 3 months, you will see them strike out. Asymmetric attacks, terrorism, etc. as well,
Correct.
proxies around the world. None of us should be alluded to.
So that's what you're anticipating next?
Well, I think it's just a reality. We just need to be hardened to that. You know, we've done the right thing. And of course, Australia, our language, I talked about the 5 things, you know, regime change, leadership, moving this leadership, Straits of Hormuz, destruction of the Navy. They're US declared objectives. Australia supports primarily the first objective. And that's obviously to assure ourselves as an international community that Iran never has access to enriched uranium so it can build nuclear weapons. All those others are actually US objectives. We've been very careful with our language, but the reality is regime change never happens smoothly. It is always leaves gaps, movement, and it creates, there's winners and losers. And those losers don't forget, and they eventually, those, you've seen that with ISIS, you've seen it with AUKUS, seen a whole lot of other terrorist organisations emerge. We forget 20 years ago we had the Arab Spring, where we thought democracy was going to break out in the Middle East and of course those northern African countries. Of course, anything but. Sure, we had a moment of stability, we had a moment of regime changes, but of course then we had instability and we had terrorist activities as well.
Yeah, we also had weak leadership in the US at the time, didn't come in and support it.
Yeah, look, and that could be a factor.
Big difference this time.
Yeah, well, obviously we can argue about different periods in say US, but other in terms of leadership, absolutely, and fundamentals. That said, can I just make one comment though about the current situation? I am still a strong believer in the power doctrine.
What's that?
And power doctrine, and I've got a quick note here. First of all, Colin Powell, of course, who led.
Colin Powell,
Powell led, of course, forces and the coalition. Oh, sorry, he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
That's right.
Stormont Norman led the coalition in Gulf War One.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Well, that aside, his doctrine essentially was one: when you go to conflict, make sure it's in your national interest. Absolutely, it has to be in your national interest. Number two, it should be at the last resort. You should do everything you can possible.
Yep.
But I think you have to have clear, attainable objectives. You need to have an exit strategy. And you need to be able to explain to your people, not how you're fighting, but why you're doing it. But you need to have an exit strategy. You need to have overwhelming force, including potentially troops on the ground. And you need to build international consensus. And we talked about the United Nations. I agree. The United Nations is not perfect. It's done some good things, but it has failed in other areas as well. But we need to look at the Iran conflict in terms of leadership right now. Absolutely need strong leadership, but assure ourselves of, I think, of three things. One, do we have an exit strategy? Do we know where this ends?
No.
Is this another endless war?
I don't know. I don't know what the doctrine is.
Secondly, overwhelming force is great, obviously with air power, but unfortunately, it often does end up with boots on the ground. And thirdly, at some stage, you need to have an international consensus. And as I said, Australia has made it very clear we support what Iran and Israel is doing in terms of the destruction of Iran's capability to build nuclear weapons. We have not really gone further in terms of actually supporting other objectives at this time.
Well, my understanding is the Israelis are going in to destroy the regime's leadership.
This is why I mentioned that, US and Israel, the objectives
things, right?
could be different. US has a vote here, Iran has a vote, and Israel has a vote. And I'd suggest the Gulf states have a vote, and the international community has a vote as well. And we're all looking at this differently in terms of objectives.
Where does Australia stand in terms of leadership then?
Well, I think the government probably learned some lessons from Bondi in terms of responding, communicating, bringing Australia along in terms of a clear narrative about why we're doing things and how we're doing things, etc. as well. I think in this case, Australia's response has generally been about right and positive. We're not observing. We're not central to the Middle East conflict this time. But we certainly have made it very clear why we support support the destruction of Iran's nuclear weapons enrichment capability. We supported the US and Israel in that regard. But we haven't been silent, but we haven't actually talked about regime change and destruction of leadership, etc. and Straits of Hormuz directly. We've made comment that we are observing, we're part of the international community, we are concerned, etc. And of course, the conflict should be a quick, decisive victory, and it should have an end state. So I think that's been positive. Now, of course, I don't think it's too late. I think our offer now of military equipment, such as to support the Gulf states, US.
Was it an offer or more of very much a genuine request from those?
I think it's also us realising that countries like UAE, who are important in terms of our relationship, are now are being struck by Iran, and we have an obligation to support them if we can. So having early airborne warning aircraft, having tankers, having C-17s, having offerers to actually provide certain air-to-air missiles, because those munitions go very quickly. I think it's right. And then even the situation, people will compare it to, say, the ISIS bride situation.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the situation with the the very brave Iranian soccer women, I think the Australian government has moved very quickly to provide the conditions that allowed them, by their own choice, to make a decision whether they went to their own country or not. So in terms of the current leadership situation last week or so, I think the responses have been good. In terms of general leadership, I think my only comment would be, as I said, the reality of national will. We've got to really harden ourselves.
So where are we on national will? What's the barometer telling you?
I just don't think we're hard enough. I don't think
Is that the West in general?
I think the West in general. I think obviously President Trump, language is important. Whether you like it or not, declaring that it's not the Department of Defense, it's the Department of War. It's a reality.
Right.
He says, I'm sure his lawyer says, please don't say these things, but he says it as it is. He says it's a war, it's a conflict.
Right.
We are going to punch them while they're down, whatever it may be. It's uncomfortable language, but I think we have to be very careful of avoiding being too careful. We have to be very, including our conversations with our society, to saying we are mobilising, we are going to spend more on defence, we do have threats, we do need to industrialise. It's not to alarm you, it's to alert you that in the future we may need to call on our military, to defend, to actually conduct defensive Australian operations from Australia.
Or intelligence operations.
I give ANZAC addresses where I always think of, when you're in a town, say, I was in Milton and Ulladulla a couple of years ago, and this great town, and all these people come in for this fantastic commemoration, celebration of the Anzac spirit. But I think of those people 120 years ago, when it wasn't just those adventurous soldiers going off to war, it was the mums and dads letting these boys go off to war. They're letting go, sure, for all the right reason. Are we hard enough? We've got a good generation now who hasn't actually fought wars or experienced war. The last of the World War II veterans are almost, to be frank, or lived during that generation. We're a generation who haven't had to send our sons and daughters to war. We actually have had a very good run, to be frank, in terms of prosperity.
Yep.
And I said, Australia, it's not my quote, we had the tyranny of distance was our advantage. Now we have the reality of proximity. We actually are very close to the threats to Australia, and we need to harden up.
Is China really the threat? What you get after all your study? We hear China. Then we've had one guest in the podcast, a colonel in the US, say no, it's not. What do you really think it is?
Well, I think China is a concerning global power that has made it very clear of their intentions to do activities not in Australia's interest. For example, take Taiwan in the future. So we need to be very, very, we need to listen to them, And Xi made some speeches in 2014-15. For many years, people said China doesn't know what it really wants. 2014-15, President Xi told us exactly what they want. They want to make sure that people respect them as a global superpower. They're territorial now, and actually historically is acknowledged and protected. That they have a significant influence on the Indo-Pacific region, and the way they go about that may not be in Australia's interest. It may be perceived, and it may actually be aggressive, and we need to be ready to actually potentially counter that as a nation, or counter that as part of an alliance system, and that's a fact. That's a reality. I'm not sleepwalking into conflict. None of us want that. I want to make sure that Australia is ready and that we are deterring activity by having a strong military, national will, strong leadership, and all things in place so that we never have to go to war.
All right, you talked about soft leadership a bit earlier on the West. How strong is the leadership in our military in terms of actually hardcore, right people, right focus, leadership in there? Compared to your day?
Yeah, look, well, it's also, of course, I left full-time service 5 years, but still remain in active reserves, et cetera, as well. I think we have been affected by expectations in terms of which are less focused on war fighting and more focused on good governance, and I guess reflective of a modern society. Now, I absolutely think we should be an inclusive defence force and a diverse defence force. Because remember, a defence force defends the society, upholds the society's values, and actually has to look and feel like the society it serves.
They're also there to kill.
Well, that's the point. At the same time,
is the number
though,
one
we
role
need
we
to
need
make
to,
sure that we are using language like war fighting, etc.,
Yeah.
as well. So, yeah. So the answer is, I don't think. I think our leadership is up for it,
Is it?
but it needs to be. It needs to be awoken, and I think it's now waking up, and it's waking up to the serious consequences of not being prepared.
All right. Any final comments, Lee? We need to think about as an Australian citizen walking down the street.
Look, just a final one, just on leadership. We need strong leaders in Australia. At every single level. We don't need bystanders. I think positive debate where we can agree to disagree on things is actually a good thing. We don't always
making it personal.
We don't make it personal, but you don't always have to have a consensus. Good leadership is about giving people what they need, not what they want. What we want is, the world as it was, say, 20 years ago. What we actually need now is to be told the truth. We actually are in a different period. Sorry, not a different period of history. We're in a repeating period of history, and we need to be tough enough and ready as an Australian society to acknowledge that.
I always ask this question. We didn't get to do it today because I didn't get the chance to go through your background in detail.
Yeah.
Maybe we might do that again another time.
Yeah.
If you were to look back at the young man joining the Navy all those years ago, and we're talking leadership, what advice would you give yourself now?
Look, we all overthink things sometimes. We all second guess ourselves sometimes, etc. Look, I joined the Navy to escape the suburbs of Melbourne. It was like adventurism, join a high performing team and serve my country, and I'm very proud of that. I actually can honestly say, I would say to a midshipman or a junior naval officer now about to join his ship, my advice is that the benefit of hindsight, I would like to go through all the same mistakes, all the same highs, the same lows, because it made me a much better person. The reality is not every day is a good day, but they're great weeks, great months, great years. Just basically be who you are and keep riding the horse you are. Don't second guess yourself and don't overthink things.
On that, Rear Admiral, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the time.
You've been listening to No Limitations.